She was just a girl in the background, someone most people didn't notice, and that's how she liked it. Her name was Eliza. She worked as a waitress in a grand hotel known for its rich guests and elegant events. Every day, she wore the same black and white uniform, served drinks, cleared tables, and quietly moved through the halls like a shadow. People passed her by, sometimes without even looking at her face. But what they didn't know was that Eliza held a secret, a deep one. Whenever she had time, even just a few seconds, she would walk by the big, grand piano in the main hall. It was a beautiful, shiny black instrument that stood under a golden light, untouched by anyone except hired musicians. Her fingers itched every time she passed it. Sometimes, very late at night, when everyone was gone and the cleaning staff were busy somewhere else, she would softly press a few keys, just enough to hear the sound, just enough to remind herself that the dream wasn't fully dead. Eliza used to play long ago when she was still in school. Her mother saved money to pay for lessons, and she used to win small competitions. But life changed. Her mother got sick and then passed away. Bills piled up. College was no longer possible. She had to work, and working meant long shifts at the hotel. But she never forgot the feeling of playing the piano. The music lived inside her, buried, waiting. Sometimes when she wiped the tables near the piano, she would hum melodies she made in her head. No one noticed. They were too busy laughing, drinking, and celebrating their lives while hers stood still. One afternoon, she was cleaning the piano with a soft cloth, gently polishing the keys, when one of the hotel managers walked by. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Be careful with that. It's not a toy," then walked off. Eliza nodded silently, her hands frozen on the keys. That night, as the hotel prepared for its biggest music event of the year, she heard whispers about a famous pianist arriving line. Ardell. He was a worldwide star. People called him a genius, a legend. His hands were magic, they said. The hotel was hosting a private event for him, and many rich guests were flying in just to hear him play. Eliza didn't care much about celebrities. But when she saw his face on the posters, she recognized him. She had watched one of his performances online when she was younger. His talent was great, yes, but something about him felt cold. Still, he was coming tonight, and the staff had to prepare everything perfectly. She worked hard that day, running back and forth from the kitchen, polishing glasses, folding napkins, arranging candles. But even as she did her job, her eyes kept drifting toward the piano in the hall. It had been freshly cleaned, ready for the master to arrive. Hours passed, and the guests started arriving. Men in shiny black suits, women in sparkling gowns. Laughter echoed through the halls. Expensive perfume filled the air. Eliza moved around, like a ghost, holding trays and smiling politely. Though inside, she felt like she didn't belong. She paused near the doorway of the hall for just a moment, just enough to watch the pianist walk in. Leon Ardell wore a long black coat and carried an air of pride. He didn't smile at anyone, not even the staff. His eyes were sharp, cold. He had already judged the world and found it boring. He sat at the piano and played a short piece for sound check. The room fell silent. Even Eliza had to admit was beautiful, but it felt perfect in a cold way, like a machine doing its job. There was no emotion in it, no soul. She quietly left before anyone saw her watching. Back in the service area, she leaned against the wall and sighed. Her fingers moved in the air, playing invisible keys. She remembered the sound of her own music, how it used to make her feel alive. For a moment, she wished things had been different. She wished she had been born into a life where her only job was to play, but no one knew what she could do. Number 1 had heard her. To them, she was just a server. A girl with trays, not dreams. A girl with a uniform, not a talent. And Eliza had learned to keep quiet because dreams were expensive, and she couldn't afford them anymore. Still deep in her chest, something refused to die. Something still lived, waiting for just one chance, one moment. The morning after the sound check, the entire hotel was buzzing with excitement. Staff moved quickly through the halls, preparing every detail for the big evening ahead. Flowers were brought in, lights adjusted, chairs cleaned twice, and the silverware was checked to shine perfectly. Everyone knew tonight's concert would bring important guests, businessmen, celebrities, and elite families. The grand piano in the middle of the hall stood under a soft spotlight, waiting for the star. Eliza arrived early for her shift. Her uniform was neatly pressed, and she tied her hair back the same way she always did. No one noticed her among the crowd of workers. She blended in like part of the furniture. But inside, her heart was beating, faster than usual. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the excitement. Maybe it was something else. A strange feeling in her chest told her that tonight would be different. She watched the piano from across the room as she cleaned the glasses. A tall flower arrangement stood beside it now, and a red carpet ran through the middle of the hall. Guests would soon fill every seat. Eliza thought about how it must feel to walk up to the piano with everyone watching, expecting something amazing. She tried to imagine herself sitting there, but it felt like imagining the moon in her hands, something too far, too unreal. Time passed quickly. By evening, the hall was full of people. Rich women in long dresses walked gracefully, holding glasses of wine. Men talked loudly, laughing with confidence. Everyone looked like they belonged in this world of sparkle and power. Eliza walked among them, serving drinks, refilling trays, cleaning spills. She smiled politely when someone made a joke, nodded when thanked, and moved silently through the room like she had been trained to do. Then the lights dimmed, and soft music played in the background. A voice from the stage announced the highlight of the evening: Leon Ardell. People clapped with excitement. Phones came out to take pictures, and all eyes turned to the piano. Leon walked in slowly, like he owned the place. He wore a black suit with a silver chain, and his hair was combed back perfectly. His expression was calm but proud, like he knew no one could match his talent. Eliza stood near the wall, holding a tray of drinks. She watched him closely, not as a fan, but with something deeper, something thoughtful. He took his seat at the piano and ran, his fingers over the keys. The first note echoed through the hall like a whisper. Then he began to play. The music was flawless. Every note was perfect, and the audience listened in complete silence. But Eliza felt something missing. Yes, it was beautiful. Yes, it was technical. But it didn't move her. It didn't speak. It didn't cry or smile. It didn't tell a story. It felt like a beautiful painting made by a machine. The guests, however, were amazed. They clapped loudly after each piece, calling him a genius. After his third song, Leon stood and took a short break. That's when something unexpected happened. A young man in the crowd, a little drunk and loud, pointed at Eliza and shouted, "Hey, maybe the waitress wants to play something too." Everyone laughed. Leon turned his head and looked at Eliza. Then, with a smirk, he said, "Maybe she does. What do you say, miss? Want to try the keys?" The room erupted in more laughter. Eliza froze. Her hands tightened around the tray. What's holding? Her face turned red. Someone clapped and cheered, trying to pressure her. Another said, "Let her try. It'll be fun." The manager stepped forward, looking nervous, and tried to calm the situation. But Leon waved his hand, pretending to be kind. "It's fine. We're all friends here. Just a bit of fun," he said with a smile that wasn't really a smile. Eliza didn't know what to do. She wanted to run, but something inside her said no, not this time. not again. Her heart beat so loudly in her ears that she could barely hear the people anymore. She slowly placed the tray on the nearest table, then turned and began walking toward the piano. The guests quieted down. Some were curious. Some were still laughing. Some waited for her to trip or mess up. Eliza felt their eyes on her like 1,000 sharp pins. She stepped up to the bench, took a breath, and sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys, shaking slightly. In that moment, she forgot the people. Forgot the lights, forgot even Leon standing behind her. All she could see was the piano, and all she could feel was the music waiting inside her, waiting to be set free, waiting for someone to listen. Even if just for one night, even if just once, she was ready to be heard, not as a waitress, but as who she truly was inside, a pianist with a story to tell, hidden behind silence too long. Eliza sat at the piano, her back straight and her hands frozen above the keys. The entire hall had fallen into a strange silence. It wasn't respect. It was something else. The guests were waiting for her to fail. Some looked amused, some bored, and some even whispered to each other, already expecting a joke. Leon Ardell stood to the side, arms crossed, smirking. He had no fear that his spotlight would be stolen. To him, this was just a moment of entertainment, a break between real music. The famous pianist didn't believe for 1 second that a hotel waitress could be anything more than a clumsy fool pressing random keys. But Eliza wasn't looking at him. She wasn't looking at the guests either. She was staring at the piano. Keys. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her mind was filled with memories. She remembered her mother's voice, soft and encouraging, telling her to play from the heart. She remembered the tiny room where she had practiced as a child, the chipped keys, the old bench that creaked under her weight. She remembered winning her first local contest, and how proud her mom had been. But she also remembered the moment it all stopped when her mother got sick and everything had to be sold, including their piano. Her heart carried the sound of music, even when her hands had been forced to carry trays instead. Now, for the first time in years, she was sitting in front of a real piano again, in a place where she didn't belong. In front of people who didn't care about her, in a room filled with laughter that had turned into silence. She took a deep breath. Her fingers touched the keys. At first, she played one soft note, then another. The sound was gentle, like someone knocking politely at a door. The room didn't react. No one clapped. No one booed. They were still watching, waiting. Then, without warning, her hands began to move, and music flowed out. Not just sound, but something more. The melody she played wasn't written on any sheet. It came from inside her. It was a piece she had made long ago, something she used to play when she was sad, alone, and trying not to cry. It started slow, like a whisper, like a story being told carefully, word by word. Then it grew louder, stronger, as if her heart was finally speaking. Her fingers moved across the piano like they had never stopped playing. They danced and flew, touching black and white keys with perfect grace. The hall was frozen. The laughter had vanished. People looked at each other in confusion, then amazement. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a mistake. This was something real. Her music carried emotion, deep, raw emotion. It spoke of pain, of nights spent wishing, of years in silence, of losing someone you love, of holding back tears in crowded rooms, of being invisible, and still keeping a dream alive. Some guests leaned forward in their chairs. Drawn in, a woman near the front wiped a tear from her cheek. A man set down his wineglass, forgetting to sip. Even Leon Ardell's face had changed. His smile had disappeared. His arms uncrossed. He was no longer enjoying the joke. He was no longer the center of attention. All eyes were now on the girl. He had laughed at Eliza, didn't see them. She wasn't playing for them. She wasn't even playing for him. She was playing for her mother. For herself, for the little girl who still lived inside her, begging to be heard. As the music rose and fell, the sound echoed across the hall like waves crashing on a shore. Soft, then wild. Quiet, then bold. Her fingers never slowed. Her body moved with the rhythm, her eyes half closed, and when the final note came, she held it. Let it ring out slowly until the sound melted into silence. Then, silence held the room again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the silence of boredom or cruelty or mocking. It was the silence of respect, of awe, of people who had seen something they never expected and didn't know how to respond. Then, one person stood and clapped. Another joined, and another. Within seconds, the hall exploded in applause. Loud, wild, honest applause. People stood to their feet, cheering, whistling, calling out praise. The same crowd that once laughed now stared with wide eyes and open hearts. Eliza stood slowly, blinking, her chest rising with deep breaths. She looked around, still unsure if this was real. Her hands hung at her sides, still tingling. She had done it not for glory, not for revenge, but simply because the music inside her couldn't stay silent anymore. And now, no one would ever forget. Her again, Eliza stood beside the piano, her hands still shaking from the final note. The hall was filled with loud clapping, cheers, and even some shouts of bravo. It felt like a dream. She looked around, unsure how to react. She had never expected this. She thought people would laugh at her. But instead, they were cheering for her. Many of the guests stood on their feet, clapping with big smiles on their faces. Some had tears in their eyes. Even the ones who had laughed earlier were now silent, their faces filled with surprise. Eliza didn't smile. Because she wasn't happy, but because she didn't know how. The moment felt too big, too strange. For years, she had lived in the background, quiet and invisible. And now, for the first time, she was at the center of everything. She looked at the piano one last time and stepped back, wanting to disappear again. But something stopped her. The crowd didn't let her go so easily. One guest reached out and gently touched her arm, saying, "That was beautiful." Another asked, "Who taught you to play like that?" Eliza didn't answer. She simply nodded and gave a small thank you. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the noise. And then the crowd parted. Leon Ardell, the famous pianist, walked toward her. His smile was gone. His eyes looked serious now. He stood in front of her, not saying a word. For a few seconds, the room became quiet again. Waiting to hear what he would say, he tilted his head and looked her up and down. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low. "Eliza," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You work here?" he asked again. She nodded. "I'm a waitress." He stared at her, then looked back at the piano. "That piece you played, was it your own?" "Yes," she said. Still nervous, "I wrote it." There was a long pause. Then Leon gave a strange half-smile nod, a mocking one this time. It was hard to read. "You play with emotion," he said raw. Untamed, Eliza didn't know if that was a compliment or an insult. She stayed quiet. Leon turned and faced the audience. He raised his hand for silence. The guests stopped talking at once. "I came here tonight to play music," he said loudly, "but I think we've already heard something greater." Gasps filled the room. People looked at each other in surprise. Was he serious? Did the world's most famous pianist just praise a hotel waitress? Leon stepped back, letting Eliza stand alone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this girl has something rare. Not just talent, but soul." Eliza couldn't believe her ears. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. She stood still, taking in every second. Then the manager of the hotel appeared. He pushed through the crowd, looking nervous. "Eliza," he said quickly, "you weren't supposed to do that." The guests turned to him with angry looks. One woman snapped, "What do you mean? She was amazing." The manager cleared his throat, unsure what to say. He didn't want trouble, especially not with so many rich guests watching. She's staff," he mumbled. But Leon stepped in. "Then maybe you've been wasting her talent," he said sharply. The manager froze. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He had no answer. Another guest shouted, "Give her a raise." More laughter and cheers followed. The crowd was now fully on Eliza's side. A woman from a music agency came up and gave Eliza her card. "Call me tomorrow," she said. "You? Have something special." More people came, asking questions, offering praise. Eliza felt overwhelmed. She had spent years being ignored. And now everyone wanted to talk to her. But even in the middle of all that attention, one moment stood out more than the rest. A little girl, maybe 9 years old, walked up to her with wide eyes. She held her mother's hand and looked up at Eliza. "I want to play piano like you one day." The girl said softly. Eliza knelt down, smiled gently, and said, "Then don't ever stop dreaming, okay?" The girl nodded, her eyes sparkling. Eliza stood again, and for the first time that night, she smiled. Real one. It was small, but full of light. The crowd began to talk again. The night moved on. The music continued, but the mood had changed. The hall that once saw her as a server now saw her as an artist. Leon played again, but this time the audience didn't cheer as loudly. Something had shifted, something important, and Eliza, who had been invisible for so long, now stood in the light, not by force, not by luck, but because her music had finally been heard, and it spoke louder than any words ever could. That night changed everything for Eliza, but not in the way most people expected. Yes, the crowd clapped for her. Yes, they praised her and called her talented. But when the lights went down and the guests left, reality returned like a cold wind. Eliza walked back to the staff room alone. Her black and white uniform still clung to her like a reminder. She was not a star. She was still a waitress. She sat quietly on a wooden bench, away from the noise of the main hall. Her hands rested on her lap, still aching slightly from the performance. Her heart was full but also confused. For the first time in years, she had let herself be seen. She had shown the world her music, and the world had loved it. But now, what came next? The next morning, she came to work early, like always. The hotel looked the same. The hall was being cleaned. The piano was covered again. The glamour of the night had vanished. No one greeted her differently. The same staff passed her in the halls. No one stopped her to say good job or that was amazing. It was as if the magical moment had never happened. The manager walked past her and gave her a quick look. "Get the glasses done before lunch," he said sharply. "We're expecting a large group today." Eliza nodded without a word dot in her pocket. She still had the business card from the woman who said she worked for a music agency. She had held it tightly all night, even while she slept. She had stared at it again and again, reading the name and number, but she hadn't called, not yet. Something inside her held her back. Doubts began to creep in. What if the woman was just being kind? What if people only clapped because they were surprised? What if it wasn't real? Eliza had lived so long in the background that her heart wasn't used to the spotlight. Later that day, during her short lunch break, she quietly returned to the piano. The hall was empty. The lights were off. Only the soft glow of afternoon sun lit the room. She uncovered the piano and sat down. Her fingers touched the keys gently. She played just a few notes. It was peaceful, safe. Then she heard footsteps. She looked up. Leon Ardell had entered the hall. He wasn't wearing his suit now, just a black shirt and simple pants. His hands were in his pockets. "You came back," he said. Eliza stood quickly. I wasn't going to play long," she said, nervous. Leon walked slowly toward her. "Relax," he said. "I'm not here to stop you." He paused, looking at the piano. "I didn't sleep well last night," he added. "Kept hearing your song in my head." Eliza didn't know what to say. Leon sat on a nearby chair. "I've played in over 50 countries," he said. "I've won awards. People call me a genius. But last night, you reminded me of something." She stayed quiet, waiting. "You reminded me what it means to play from the heart," he continued. "I forgot that feeling. Everything I do now is measured, polished, perfect, but empty." Eliza finally spoke. "Your music is amazing," she said honestly. "But it doesn't feel alive." Leon laughed softly. "Exactly," he said. "You played like your soul was screaming through your fingers." There was a long silence between them. Then he asked, "Why haven't you called the agency?" She looked down. "I don't know," she said. "I'm just scared." He nodded. "That's fair," he said. "But fear doesn't mean you shouldn't try." Eliza sat again at the piano. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked, her voice small. Leon stood and looked at her seriously. "You're already better than most," he said. "Not because of skill, but because you feel every note. And that's rare." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "This is the name of a music school in the city. I teach there sometimes. Come by." She took the paper with shaky hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Then he turned and walked away. That evening, Eliza sat on her bed in her small room. The city lights blinked outside her window. She held both the business card and the note from Leon in her hands. Her heart was pounding. She thought about her mother, about the piano, about everything she had lost, and everything she might still gain. She picked up her phone. Slowly, nervously, she dialed the number on the business card. A voice answered. "Hello, this is Melody Arts." Eliza took a deep breath, her hands still trembling. "My name is Eliza," she said. "You saw me play last night?" The voice on the phone smiled warmly. "Yes, Eliza. We've been waiting for your call." And just like that, the door to a new world opened a little wider. But she still had to be brave enough to walk through it. The next morning, Eliza woke up earlier than usual. She hadn't slept much. Her heart was still beating fast from the phone call she made the night before. The woman from the music agency, her name was Ms. Claire, had sounded kind and excited. She had invited Eliza to visit their office that day. Just the thought of it made Eliza nervous, but also strangely hopeful. She stood in front of her small mirror, brushing her hair slowly. Her hands were cold. What would they ask her? What if they didn't like her in person? What if last night had been a mistake? Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling deep in her chest, like something big was waiting just outside her door. She put on a simple dress and walked to the train station. The city outside was loud and busy, but her thoughts were louder. She kept remembering her performance, the way people had looked at her, and especially the words Leon Ardell had said. "You play like your soul is screaming through your fingers." The agency office was in a tall glass building downtown. Eliza walked through the doors and told the receptionist her name. After a few minutes, Ms. Claire appeared, a smartly dressed woman with kind eyes and a bright smile. "Eliza," she said, shaking her hand warmly. "I'm so glad you came." Eliza smiled shyly. "Thank you for inviting me." They walked into a cozy room with a piano in the corner. Ms. Claire offered her some tea and sat across from her. "I've been thinking about your performance all night," she said. You have something rare." Eliza looked down, feeling shy. "I'm not trained," she admitted. "I stopped playing for years." Claire nodded. "That doesn't matter." She said, "Some people train all their lives and never move anyone. You played and touched every soul in that hall." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them quickly, feeling embarrassed. Ms. Claire leaned forward. "We'd like to help you," she said. "With guidance, practice, and support, you can become something even greater. I want to introduce you to a few people who can help." Shape your journey. Eliza couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? Just then, the door opened and another woman entered. She was a music teacher named Ms. Rena, who had worked with many famous performers. She looked Eliza up and down, curious but polite. "Would you play something for us?" she asked gently, pointing toward the piano. Eliza nodded slowly. She stood, walked to the piano, and sat down. She closed her eyes for a moment. The world disappeared. Then her fingers began to move. The melody she played was soft and full of emotion. It wasn't a song from a book. It was her own creation, something she had written long ago when she was feeling lost. The room stayed silent, not just with respect, but with awe. When she finished, she looked up and saw tears in Ms. Claire's eyes. Ms. Rena was smiling quietly. "You don't just play notes," Rena said. "You tell stories." From that moment, everything changed. Eliza was offered a mentorship with Ms. Rena, private lessons at the agency studio, and even a small grant to help her leave her job at the hotel if she wanted to focus on music. It felt like a dream, like someone had taken her hand and pulled her into a new world. But even then, Eliza didn't rush. That night, she returned home and sat on her bed, staring at the keys of her old plastic keyboard. She remembered days when she had to choose between food or electricity, nights when she cried quietly so no one would hear. She whispered to herself, "Is this real?" Then her phone rang. It was Leon. "I heard you went to the agency," he said. "How did it go?" "They offered to help me," Eliza replied softly, still unsure. "They want me to train." Leon's voice was calm. "Good. You deserve it. You've earned it." There was a pause. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Yes," she said truthfully. "Very." Leon chuckled gently. "Fear just means you're doing something that matters." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For years, she had only dreamed of music. But now, music was dreaming of her too. A few days later, she handed in her resignation letter at the hotel. The manager looked shocked but said nothing. Other staff members were confused, but one or two gave her small smiles as she walked out for the last time as she stepped onto the street. The city air felt different. She didn't have fame. She didn't have money. But she had a beginning. Second chance, a path forward, and most of all, she had her music again. This time, she wouldn't let it go. Weeks passed, and Eliza's life was no longer the same. Every morning, instead of putting on her waitress uniform, she now walked into a music studio filled with light, soft chairs, and the gentle sound of piano keys. She was still getting used to it. Sometimes she would sit at the piano in the quiet room, just staring at the keys, not playing, just breathing. She was no longer a girl in the background. No longer the one who served drinks in silence. She was becoming something more. A student, a performer, an artist. Ms. Rena, her mentor, was kind but strict. "Technique can be learned," she often said, "but heart, that must stay alive." Eliza trained every day. Her fingers hurt at first, but she didn't complain. She stayed late after lessons. She practiced even when her eyes were heavy from sleep. Her music became smoother, stronger, and deeper. Rena taught her things she never knew before: how to control tempo, how to add color to notes, how to shape silence into meaning. And even with all the lessons, Eliza never stopped playing her own songs. Sometimes Rena would listen quietly as Eliza played pieces she made long ago. Songs she had never shown anyone before. Rena never interrupted. She simply listened, her eyes closed, her head slightly tilted, like she was hearing someone's soul speak. Then one day, Rena gave her a piece of paper. It was an invitation. "You're ready?" she said. "There's a performance at the end of the month. It's a small show, but important. Many guests will come. It's time the world sees you again." Eliza stared at the invitation. Her hands trembled slightly. A performance. Her name on the list, not as a server, not as a joke, but as a pianist. I don't know if I can," she said. Rena smiled gently. "You already did, once. This time, you'd do it on purpose." Eliza took the invitation home and placed it on her table. She looked at it every day. As the date grew closer, her fear also grew. What if I mess up? What if no one claps this time? What if I freeze on stage? But she didn't stop preparing. She chose a piece she had written herself, a new one, a song about change, about rising after falling. She called it Awaken. She poured her heart into it. Every note carried meaning. Every pause was heavy with emotion. She practiced it until her hands knew it better than her mind. Finally, the day arrived. The concert was held in a cozy music hall, not huge, but beautiful. Warm lights lit the stage, and the audience sat in quiet rows, waiting. There were other performers too, but Eliza was the final one. The closing performance. Backstage, her hands were cold. She could hear the soft music from the earlier performers, and her chest felt tight. Leon Ardell came to visit her backstage. He smiled calmly, as if he had no doubt. "You're not the same girl from that hotel anymore," he said. "But don't forget who she was." Eliza nodded. She remembered that night clearly. The laughter, the mocking, the silence. And then, the sound of her own music rising above it all. Now, she had a chance to rise again. Her name was called. She walked slowly onto the stage, wearing a simple black dress. Not shiny, not expensive, but elegant. Her hair was tied back, and she carried no jewelry. She didn't need anything extra. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath. The hall was silent. Then her fingers touched the keys, and Awaken was born. The music flowed like a story. It began soft and gentle, almost unsure. Then it built, like steps climbing higher. There was pain in the sound and hope. There were moments of quiet sadness, followed by bursts of light. Her fingers moved faster, the melody climbing, falling, and then rising again like wings. People in the crowd leaned forward. Some closed their eyes. Others sat still, afraid to move. The song spoke to something deep inside everyone. When she played the final note, the sound hung in the air like a final breath. Then silence followed. A deep, powerful silence. Then came the applause. But this time, Eliza didn't look surprised. She stood, bowed her head gently, and smiled. She had done it, not by luck, not by chance, by effort, by heart, by truth. She walked off the stage with tears in her eyes, but they were not sad tears. They were tears of freedom. She was no longer just the girl with a hidden dream. She was now the girl who had stepped into the light and played her heart out for the world to hear. The days after the concert felt like a dream to Eliza. People she didn't know began to recognize her on the street. Some stopped her just to say, "Your music touched me." Others smiled and nodded as if they had seen something magical in her. For a girl who once served drinks quietly in a hotel, it was all strange and beautiful. The video of her performance was uploaded online by someone in the audience. Within days, it started spreading across social media. Comments poured in from all over the world, people calling her the girl with the soul in her fingers, and the pianist who brought tears without saying a word. One comment stood out the most. It simply said, "She didn't just play the piano, she told my story." That line made Eliza cry, because that was what she had always wanted, to be understood, even if she didn't speak. She had spent years feeling invisible, carrying pain in silence. Now, her music had spoken for her. Ms. Claire called and told her the agency had received invitations from different places and small concerts, music interviews, and even a scholarship offer from a famous music academy. But even with all the attention, Eliza stayed humble. She still practiced every morning, still took lessons from Ms. Renna, still worked hard to improve. Fame didn't make her forget how far she had come. One afternoon, she visited the hotel where she used to work. She wore simple clothes and walked through the same back door she had once used every day. The manager was surprised to see her. "Eliza," he said, blinking, "you look different." She smiled kindly. "I just wanted to say thank you." He looked confused. "For what?" "For the piano," she said. "For the night when everything changed." She didn't stay long. She just wanted to see the place again, not as someone who cleaned tables, but as someone who had found her voice in the middle of silence. Later that week, Leon Ardell invited her to his private studio. It was a quiet place filled with books, records, and soft light. He greeted her with a warm nod and offered her tea. "I heard the world finally knows your name," he said, smiling. She smiled back, "Thanks to that night." "And to you?" Leon shook his head. "No, I mocked you that night." "You rose on your own." There was a moment of silence between them, filled with respect. Then he asked, "What will you do next?" Eliza thought for a moment. She looked at the piano sitting in the room and said, "I want to teach." Leon raised his eyebrows. "Teach?" "Yes," she nodded. "I want to help kids like me. The ones who can't afford lessons. The ones who think they don't belong. I want to help them find their sound." Leon leaned back and gave her a look filled with quiet pride. "That," he said, "is the heart of a true musician." Within months, Eliza started a small program for children in her neighborhood. She taught them how to play, but more importantly, how to feel. She taught them that music wasn't just about right notes, it was about truth. The children adored her. One little girl made her a bracelet out of beads and said, "You make me believe I'm special." Every time Eliza played now, she wasn't just performing. She was giving something back, sharing something she once thought she had lost forever. Her past never left her. She still remembered the lonely nights, the hard days at the hotel, the sound of plates and trays. But now, those memories didn't hurt. They gave her strength. She played on bigger stages, yes, but the moment that meant the most came quietly. It happened in a small school auditorium during a children's recital. One of her students, a shy boy who used to be too scared to speak, sat at the piano and played a simple tune. He looked nervous, just like Eliza once had. But when he finished, the room clapped, and he smiled for the first time in weeks. Eliza stood in the back, her hands together, her eyes full of tears. That night, as she walked home under the stars, she whispered to herself, "This is what it's ought." All for, not the fame, not the praise, but the music, the truth. The light in someone's eyes when they believe for the first time. She wasn't just a girl who played the piano anymore. She was a voice for the silent, a guide for the lost, and proof that even from the quietest corners, a song can rise and change the world.